Hello, this is David D. Hilster. I'm a critical thinker, dissident scientist, and I'm here to tell you the truth about science. Something you university professors won't tell you, the mass media won't tell you, and certainly those science evangelists won't tell you. One of the things I try to do and think about my audience, you guys, my subscribers, is to say, okay, what can I talk to you about that you probably don't know about? Something that you're not going to find on your own, or some subject that maybe you haven't even thought of. So I started to think, we've got a database of almost 3,000 scientists, and I've been hanging out with some of these great thinkers for, my goodness, almost 3 decades now. And unfortunately, some of them have already passed on. People that it's hard to believe because I knew them for so many, many years, and they're no longer with us. And the great thing is we've kept, Greg Volk and I spent a lot of time in the late 2000, the first decade of the 2000s, putting together this big database of people, which now has been transferred over to the Wikipedia. And we were going to be, one of our projects for the future is to grow this and to get this in shape. But here's one person who I do miss. He was actually the first person I really got to know in this organization now that we call the CNPS at the MPA at the time. I met him in 1996 when I was trying to spread the word about Dr. Karazani's work in autodynamics and the flaw he found in special relativity. I found this group somehow, I think over the internet or through emails or a bulletin board, and they were having the third conference, I believe, of the MPA in Flagstaff, Arizona in 1996. I was 36 at the time, and I flew in and got to meet these people. That's when I got to meet John Chappell, shared a room with him, who founded the organization. And Neil Munch was a person who helped run around and pick me up. He was sort of, I guess, one of the people doing the conference, and quite a nice guy. But during the years, I learned about Neil, and he was a person that harped on one very, 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 very important thing and drilled into our heads, and that is some assumptions. What are the assumptions you make? And of course, some assumptions are things that you cannot prove. You have to say, okay, I believe there's mass, and I believe mass is always moving. I believe that mass, when it hits, can bounce off each other. I believe that they can glom together to form a bigger mass. Whatever your assumptions are, you should list them. And he was always very adamant about, well, you're writing this paper with all these terms and terminology and equations. What are your assumptions? In fact, mainstream science really has a real hard time, if at all, defining their assumptions. I think if they do, and if they were to try, like many of us who work outside the mainstream try to do, they will find that a lot of those assumptions are in conflict. But Neil Munch was an engineer, mechanical engineer. He worked, as you can see here, he was retired from General Electric. Some of the rocket engines he worked on are now on display in the Smithsonian. He unfortunately passed away in 2014. That's really hard to believe. It's been that many years already. But if you go down further, you can see he had a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Cornell. Again, a lot of the people say, hey, these people that are working outside the mainstream, they're just a bunch of nobodies, but obviously Cornell is a great university. He had graduate engineering studies at Cornell as well, and graduate engineering and physics studies at the Stevens Institute of Technology. Masters of Science in Engineering, and followed by a PhD in PhD studies. I'm not sure if he ever got his PhD, but he also was a founding director in 1995 Natural Philosophy Alliance. You can see that right here. He was one of the people who really were influential in beginning the organization we are now today. And you can see his paper, The Value of Assumptions Controls in Advanced Physics. And in fact, you can read this in full. I'm not going to read it. I'm going to be just sort of introducing you to these people. This link will be below. And you can see he worked a lot in the area of special relativity, talked about flaws in modern physics, the nature of light and other emissions, simple assumption errors in validated relativity. You can see you can read these in full. Not all of them are here. We do have copies a lot of these things, but they're hard copies. But those that we do have and available, we have here, and you can click on them and get those copies. This is all located in the Wikipedia, which is wiki.naturalphilosophy.org. It is a Wikipedia full software version of it. I've myself installed it, and it is the exact same software as in Wikipedia. We have over 13,000 pages of information here from our database coming in here, and if you're really interested, you can actually say, hey Dave, I'd like to help in making this, working on this. There's lots to work on, lots of errors if you go around and see, because obviously when I made a translation between the database and the wiki, there are going to be things that don't work out in the links and everything. You can see right here, there's a question mark for apostrophe. But you can go through here and see the many papers, the many papers Neil Munch wrote on, and was constantly on our case. My father and I were greatly influenced by his constant browbeating us into saying, hey Dave, hey everybody, get your assumptions right. So it's definitely a person you should know about. The reason I'm going to do some of these now are some of the people who have passed on, who I think were great influences to all of us who work outside the mainstream, and maybe in some sense forgotten, but they are not forgotten because we have our wonderful database, thanks to Greg and myself. We've tried to catalog as much as we can. We have been doing that lately, but it's something that's very important. But assumptions. What are your assumptions for your model? What are your assumptions when you are working on your papers? Or if you're a person that's just a subscriber and you read this and you're interested in it, what assumptions do you think the reader is trying to make? Are they making assumptions that are conflicting? That's a real problem. So thank you very much, Neil. Miss you greatly, and your spirit, and but you really left an impression on the scientific world with assumptions. And I do hope you take the time to take a look at his page, read some of the assumptions. You can see I'm not really excited. It's it's one of the things of being around these people for so long, and many of these gentlemen were. Most of them have been are retired because then they're not. Then they have free time to do all this stuff, and they have no ties or financial ties or political ties to the mainstream, where they can lose their jobs and those kinds of things. So, take a look at our natural philosophers Wikipedia, Neil Munch. And like I said, don't take my word for it. If you don't believe assumptions are important, well, why don't you read Neil Munch? He is, in my opinion, he was the guy to go to for scientific assumptions. And remember what I say, don't take my word for it, anybody else's. On faith, stay critical, stay thinking. I'm Dave D. Hilster, your science therapist. Ciao for now.